These true crime stories are so horrific, it's difficult to believe they actually happened, or that human beings could be capable of committing such atrocities. And yet, these stories are indeed all true. Sometimes, real life is a lot grimmer than fiction. Sometimes, real life involves murder, abduction, betrayal, torture, and death. 7 of the most brutal murders ever committed in the history of the human race. 1. The Toolbox Killer. The transcript of what happened to Shirley Ledford at the hands of Toolbox Killers Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris is the most disturbing thing you will ever come across. An excerpt from the transcript. At this point, after Bittaker had forced Shirley to fillet him, repeated sounds of an administered beating, interspersed with loud screams, can be heard as Bittaker savagely beat Shirley about the breasts and, to a lesser degree, head. Bittaker then extracted his pliers from the toolbox. Shirley then emits several high-pitched, prolonged screams and cries of agony as Bittaker alternately squeezes and twists her labia, clitoris, nipples and breasts with the pliers. Bittaker then returns the pliers to the toolbox. Banging sounds can also be heard throughout, which are believed to have been made as Shirley came into contact with the walls and inner contents of the van as she writhed and flailed. Ledford, my God, please stop it, screams Bittaker, is the recorder going? Norris, yeah. Bittaker, scream baby, scream some, baby. 2. Kelly Ann Bates. Bates was horrifically tortured for days before her tormentor finally killed her. Below are a few examples of what she went through. According to Wikipedia, Kelly Ann Bates, 18 May 1978 to the 16th of April 1996, was a British teenager murdered on the 16th of April 1996 at age 17 in Manchester after being tortured for 4 long weeks. Kelly's eyes were gouged from their sockets up to 3 weeks before she actually died from drowning in a bathtub. These horrific crimes were committed by her partner, James Patterson Smith. Below is a list from Wikipedia of the specific injuries Kelly Ann Bates endured through torture: scalding to her buttocks and left leg, burns on her thigh caused by the application of a hot iron, a fractured arm, multiple stab wounds caused by knives, forks and scissors, stab wounds inside her mouth, crush injuries to both hands, mutilation of her ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, lips and genitalia. Wounds caused by a spade and pruning shears. Both eyes gouged out. Later stab wounds to the empty eye sockets. Partial scalping. 3. Junko Furuta. Furuta was a 17-year-old Japanese girl whose case became known as the concrete encased high school girl murder case. Furuta was kidnapped by 4 teenage boys and, aside from the brutality of the assaults against her, the most disturbing thing is that she was held at one of the kidnappers' houses and his parents were present the entire time, knew what was going on, and did nothing to stop it. Also extremely disturbing is that Furuta turned 17 while she was in captivity and enduring these horrors. There's something tremendously upsetting about that. According to Wikipedia, to avoid concern over her abduction, the perpetrators forced Furuta to call her parents and tell them that she would be staying at a friend's house for a while. Over the course of her confinement, Furuta was repeatedly raped, beaten, and tortured by her 4 captors until they killed her. The parents of Kamisaku were present in the home for at least a part of the time that Furuta was held captive, and though she pleaded with them for help, they did not intervene, later claiming that they feared their son too much to do so. The killers hid her corpse in a 208-liter oil drum filled with concrete. They disposed of the drum in a tract of reclaimed land in Koto, Tokyo. 4. The Hi-Fi Murders. In 1974, 2 men robbing a hi-fi store in Ogden, Utah held captive and tormented 5 individuals. Only 2 of the captives would survive. Among the sadism levied on the captives were the following, according to Wikipedia. Violence included a pen being kicked into an ear and the brutal rape of a teenage girl who was later shot in the head. Corrosive drain cleaner was also forcefully given to the hostages, causing horrific burns to their mouths and throats. Not only were they forced to drink drain cleaner, but their mouths were then taped shut so they couldn't spit it out or vomit it up. One of the victims, Orrin Walker, was shot several times, strangled and had a pen kicked into his ear but still survived. 5. The McStay family. In 2010, in Fallbrook, California, the McStay family, including Joseph McStay, his wife Summer, and their 2 children, was brutally murdered. The 4 were then moved by the killer and buried in a shallow grave in the desert, but their remains weren't found until 2013. For 3 years they'd simply believed to have disappeared. Forensic evidence showed that all had been beaten to death with a sledgehammer which was found near the family's remains. Joseph McStay suffered 4 blows to the head, and the family's youngest child, only 4 years old, suffered 7. Investigators also believe the family was tortured prior to being killed. Charles Merritt, McStay's former business partner, has been charged with the family's murder. 6. James Bulger. In 1993, in England, 2-year-old James Bulger was abducted by 2 10-year-olds at the mall while his mother was distracted. After taking him from the mall, the 2 boys took Bulger on a 2.5-mile walk. At one point they picked Bulger up and dropped him on his head, which caused him to have a bump on his head and, according to bystanders, cry. The 2 then took him up an embankment and onto a set of railroad tracks where they began torturing him. More details of the murder. According to Wikipedia, at the trial it was established that at this location, one of the boys threw blue Humbrol modeling paint, which they had shoplifted earlier, into Bulger's left eye. They kicked and stomped on him, and threw bricks and stones at him. Batteries were placed in Bulger's mouth. Police believed some batteries may have been inserted into his anus, although none were found there. Finally, a 22-pound (10.0 kilograms) iron bar, described in court as a railway fish plate, was dropped on him. Bulger suffered 10 skull fractures as a result of the iron bar striking his head. Dr. Alan Williams, the case's pathologist, stated that Bulger suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that none could be isolated as the fatal blow. Police suspected that there was a sexual element to the crime, since Bulger's shoes, socks, trousers and underpants had been removed. The pathologist's report read out in court stated that Bulger's foreskin had been forcibly retracted. Before they left him, the boys laid Bulger across the railway tracks and weighted his head down with rubble, in the hope that a train would hit him and make his death appear to be an accident. After Bulger's killers left the scene, his body was cut in half by a train. Bulger's severed body was discovered 2 days later on the 14th of February. 7. Amora Bain Carson. Amora Bain Carson, the 13-month-old baby who was tortured to death by her mother's boyfriend during an exorcism. I'll tell the story by copying some things from each of their appeals. Jessica Carson was the baby's mother, and the boyfriend was Blaine Milam. Jessica Carson was sentenced to life, while Blaine Milam was sentenced to death. Carson concluded that the child was like Chucky or Pet Sematary. Horror movies when the boy dies and comes back to life all evil and stuff, because the child was biting Blaine to where it was drawing blood on his hands. After Milam returned to the child, he took a picture of her and gave it to Carson. One of the child's eyes was stretched and, like, warped down. Carson heard horrible cries from the child as Milam was attempting the exorcism. During the hours involved, Milam had taken the child to a back bedroom in their small dwelling and wedged the door shut. The evidence would allow a jury to conclude that Carson was necessarily aware of what was happening to the child, because she admitted hearing the screams that accompanied such torture and because she saw the child's deformed head after some time had passed and heard the sounds caused by the blows. They found blood spatter stains, consistent with blunt force trauma, near the south bedroom. Among the items collected from the south bedroom were blood-stained bedding and baby clothes, blood-stained baby diapers and wipes, a tube of Astroglide lubricant, and a pair of jeans with blood stains on the lap. DNA testing later showed that Amora's blood was on these items. As a result of the exorcism conducted by Milam, Amora suffered innumerable injuries that led to her death. Forensic evidence showed the child was beaten so severely that the multitude of fractures to her skull connected with each other like a jigsaw puzzle, and her brain was torn and severely damaged. An arm and leg had spiral fractures indicating they were twisted in two. Her torso was either struck by a blunt object or squeezed until the ribs and sternum broke, and her body, neck, chest, abdomen, buttocks, both elbows, both forearms, both feet, right arm, left shoulder, left upper arm, left hand, right thigh, and left knee was riddled with no less than 24 distinct bite marks. Her head and face were so scraped and bruised that all the discrete injuries combined into one giant injury. Her liver was torn, and her vaginal and anal orifices were so torn that the vagina and rectum were actually connected, an injury the forensic examiner had never seen before. The underside of her tongue was lacerated from blunt force trauma. She was also strangled. Because of all the injuries she sustained, it was not possible to determine which one was the final injury, and no specific, singular cause of death was determinable. Forensic testimony reflected that several of the injuries standing alone would have each been fatal. Police were called several hours later. When they arrived, the child was entirely stiff and in rigor. On December 13, appellant's sister, Teresa, went to see appellant in jail. That night, she told her aunt that she was needing to find a way to get back out to the trailer in Tatum, because Blaine had told her that she needed to go out there to the trailer to get some evidence out from underneath of it. The aunt called Sergeant Rogers and told her that she needed to get out to the trailer immediately, that Teresa was wanting to go out there to get some evidence out from underneath the trailer. Sergeant Rogers immediately obtained a search warrant, crawled under the trailer, and discovered a pipe wrench inside a clear plastic bag. The pipe wrench had been shoved down a hole in the floor of the master bathroom. Forensic analysis revealed components of Astroglide on the pipe wrench, the diaper Amora had been wearing, and the diaper and wipes collected from the south bedroom. Werner Herzog did an episode of On Death Row about Blaine Milam, and the full episode is on YouTube. It has security footage from the pawn shop where they were supposedly pawning a chainsaw to get money for an exorcism after Amora was already dead, and a gas station, the 911 call, crime scenes photos not of Amora's body, of course, just the trailer, and interviews with pretty much everyone involved except Jessica Carson. It doesn't make it any easier, but this case raises a lot of questions, and searching online for these kinds of cases can take you horrible places that use Amora for shock value or misrepresent autopsy photos of other unfortunate victims as her. No post-mortem photos of Amora have been released and her autopsy was sealed. Especially since Amora's case hasn't been in the MSM very much due to the graphic nature of her death. With Herzog you're getting quality information on the case coming straight from those involved.